you're watching the news from Kazakhstan. I'm Marina Kim, and these are the top stories. Kazakhstan is commemorating the events on December 17, 1986, when a peaceful rally turned into bloody clashes with the internal forces and police. The truth and lies about the historical facts. Opposition demands to declassify state archives related to 1986 riots. Absatar Dirbisali is re-elected as the chief mufti of Kazakhstan. The clergy official enters his third term in 10 years. On Friday, Kazakh citizens commemorated the events on December 17, 1986. 24 years ago, Kazakh youth entered the main square of Almaty, protesting against the Kremlin's choice of Gennady Kolbin as the replacement for Dinmuhamed Kunayev in the position of the first secretary of the Kazakh Communist Party. The decision was made at the fifth plenum of the party's Central Committee, but didn't last long.
By evening, the students gathered at the main square of Almaty, where they spent nearly 2 days. The participants of the mass rally demanded to appoint a member of the local elite as the head of the country. This was the first real expression of a national will in the collapsing Soviet Union. Back then, the protest was called nationalistic, and the peaceful gathering soon turned into a bloody massacre. The revolt of Kazakh youth was suppressed by law enforcement under the Operation Blizzard. Internal troops and OMON forces were used during the riots' crackdown. The participants of the event say that the law enforcement used clamp shovels and trained dogs against the protesters, while some people were even executed. The precise numbers of the victims are still unknown. From then on, all those at the square on the fateful night were always referred to with a reference to Zheltoksan, which stands for December in Kazakh. On Friday, around 400 people gathered at the Republican Square, including city authorities and activists of different movements and political parties. The first to arrive was the very modest delegation of the Almaty administration. Officials laid a basket of roses at the monument, listened to the anthem and left. This launched the commemoration for the victims of December 1986 events. The Almaty mayor Akhmedjan Yesimov was absent, and the official address was instead given by his deputy Sergei Dumanov. As a sociologist, I can say that even though we don't have any prerequisites, there always could be some provocations. Keep that in mind. Unfortunately, the Russian society is going through an unspoken war against the Caucasus. It happens not only in Moscow, but also in other cities. The provocateurs in Russia are using inter-ethnic tensions, which we don't have, but such people who would want to use it are always around. They will be opposed by the authorities, national patriots, and Zheltoksan members. The deputy mayor didn't specify who exactly he was talking about. Interestingly, activists of the movement Kazakhstan 2012 accused Dumanov of inciting social hatred. After laying flowers at the Independence Monument, public activists approached the Almaty city administration, calling for the official's resignation. We're extremely outraged by Sergei Dumanov's anti-national and provocative statements in the media, which contribute to discrediting the authorities and incite social hatred. He told newspaper Vremya that internal migrants from villages and their children pose a threat to the society and city dwellers. Are the villagers to blame for falling victims of the market economy and policies promoted by Dumanov and others like him?
Following official delegations, the flowers were laid by movements under the Zheltoksan umbrella as well as the opposition. The occasion brought together members of the unregistered party Algai and activists of the union Zheltoksan 86, who just 2 months ago protested against the decision of Algai's leader to run for presidency.
The opposition, NGOs and intellectual elite came to the Republican Square to pay tribute to the victims of December 86 events. This type of gatherings in the center of Almaty is a very rare sight. Every approach of the monument was monitored by anti-riot units in 2 buses parked nearby. Police was also patrolling the premise, not interfering with the event. A well-known writer and national patriot, Mukhtar Shakhanov, was part of the culture elite delegation. After laying flowers, it proceeded to the Independence Monument, waving the national and the Kazakh Soviet Republic flags. Once again, the police didn't interfere with the procession. The National Social Democratic Party Azad was third to enter the square. At the Independence Monument, the Union School chairman Jarmakhan Toyakbay publicly asked participants of 1986 events for forgiveness. I believe all those in power who made decisions over the 1986 events should follow my example and repent. The 25th anniversary of these tragic events is approaching. By this date, I propose to create a commission to find people responsible for giving the key orders. We must punish them while they are still alive. Kurmangazir Akhmetov was among those tried by Jarmakhan Toyakbay. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison for taking part in 1986 riots. During the trial, Toyakbay asked for 11 years for Akhmetov, but the case fell apart by 1989. The activist was acquitted and the deputy prosecutor reprimanded. Personally, I already forgave Jarmakhan Toyakbay. I told him what I thought about it a long time ago. It would have been great if there were more people like him.
The Friday's gathering of opposition in the Almaty Square went without political propaganda. The brief speeches mostly dealt with still classified information about the 1986 riots. Just like 24 years ago, their data on victims and trials is still classified even now. Some oppositionists believe this secrecy is exactly the reason for the undying interest in the topic, despite attempts to leave the tragedy behind. In his Wednesday speech congratulating Kazakh citizens with the Independence Day, President Nazarbayev didn't even mention the 1986 events. Moreover, the head of state didn't appear publicly at all during the last 2 days.
Around 400 people, including the participants of December 1986 events, witnesses, representatives of National Patriots led by poet Mukhtar Shakhanov, activists of parties Alga and Azad, all came to Almaty's Republican Square to commemorate the events of December 1986. Shora Karabayev was here 24 years ago. He is confident that the authorities are still concealing data about the fateful day. Victims were unavoidable, but the authorities are trying to conceal this information, which is used by protest forces. If the information was open, everyone would calm down and there would be no protests. Almaty Deputy Mayor Serik Sidumanov agrees. The official feels the time has come to revisit the 1986 events a quarter of the century later, as now the opinion will be unbiased and allowed to answer all remaining questions about the history of this particular episode. There are different sides and interpretations. We must continue the research and discussions about the matter. Perhaps we will find some new documents. There are still non-rehabilitated people standing in the crowd right now. In other words, we have to continue the process. This issue will not be resolved in one day. Zhaltoksan participants discussed this opinion while near the independent monument. They believe it is impossible to reassess the history without a political will, but it might be hard to come by since even the president himself regularly ignores the commemoration day. The authorities must take part if they really want us to have real freedom. They need to show people that our country indeed has freedom and democracy. If they participate, everyone will come down. 2 hours later, after reading the farewell prayer, the participants of the meeting dispersed. This ended the second day of celebrating the 19th anniversary of Kazakhstan's independence.
The final number of victims of all proceedings in December of 1986 is still unknown. The U.S. Congress Library lists at least 200 people killed in the riots or executed later. Other sources claim the death toll is over 1,000. According to several Kazakh publications, 8,500 people were arrested, around 2,000 heavily injured. Many activists were persecuted, with some later rehabilitated, but others still live in marked as public enemies. The next report is about one such person who even now cannot obtain this political rehabilitation.
Independence Day is not a holiday for Askar Torebov, but rather a painful reminder about a personal tragedy. He was never granted moral, psychological and, importantly, political rehabilitation for the events in December 1986. During the mass pardon in 1991, his case material simply disappeared. We fought for Kazakhstan's independence there, and the country found it, while we were left with nothing. This photo captured his personal and civil achievement. Torebayeva's spouse keeps the newspaper clipping for years as evidence that her husband is also worthy to be called a participant of the 1986 events. To make this happen, the family appealed to the movement Zhaltoksan and found out that the price of the high status is just over $13 per month. I went there and asked to rehabilitate my husband. They told me we need to pay a fee of $13.50 per month. The union itself, Zhaltoksan Akikati, says they do not collect fees for a long time now. We used to do this, but not any longer. This is strictly a voluntary matter. Religious activist and civil rights advocate Murat Tilibekov believes those responsible for such initiatives must be called what they really are. This is a diverse environment which has its own honest, loyal and corrupt people. Like in any other movement, it has enough rogues, cons and swindlers. Perhaps this man ended up facing these characters. Torybayev didn't attend festivities on the square. It was hard for him to overcome the speech impediment, a personal reminder of the 1986 events, but he was never able to overcome the bitterness and resentment. Unfortunately, speech therapists do not heal mental wounds.
December is also the month when the first independent Kazakh state, the Alash Autonomous Region, was formed more than 90 years ago. Now the chairman of the self-described constructive opposition party, Akzhol, Alikhan Baymenov, proposes to make December 13 the day of Alash. The next story has more on the difference in perceiving independence today and 1 century back.
The participants of the second conference of Kazakhs in Orenburg on December 13, 1917, spoke for the first time about the creation of Kyrgyz autonomous regions called Alash. Historians note that the identifier Kyrgyz, used for the population of the region, was introduced to avoid confusion with Russian Cossacks. Borders of the Kazakh state were first declared at this historic forum. Alash activists led by Alikhan Yermekov managed to convince everyone that Kazakhs will support the Soviet regime in exchange for their ancestral land. Lenin was told that the land will still be there, as Kazakh autonomous region will still be a part of Russia. This was Alash leaders saved the enormous territory of our country. The main goal of Alash Orda government was to preserve independence, solve food problems, create first local self-governing bodies and give Kazakhs access to education. Due to instability in Russia, Alash Orda leaders felt the alliance with the Soviets will not allow the country to solve all of the pressing issues. The Communist Party, however, disagreed with this situation, and after a brief armed resistance, Alash Orda was terminated by the Revolutionary Management Committee for the Kyrgyz district. This was followed with a resolution of All Russian Central Executive Committee, which noted that the members of the independent Kyrgyz government shall not be prosecuted or punished in any way for anti-revolutionary activities. Unfortunately, when Stalin came to power, he saw Kazakh intelligentsia as dissidents ready for a coup. Because of that, almost all Alash leaders ended up executed during the 20s and 30s. Nowadays, only historians remember the Alash Orda records. Current history school books feature only a couple of pages on the matter. Experts blame the Soviet heritage, which hid away all of the documents in the secret police archives. Alikhan Baymenov, the leader of the party Akzhol, is one of the few people who believes the issue should be raised at the government level. On December 13th, he forwarded the initiative to make the day a state holiday. We propose our government to officially recognize December 13th as the Alash Orda Day. We also want to see lectures about Alash Orda taught in all educational, military and state institutions every November and December. The history of Alash Orda was immortalized in a documentary directed by Khalil Omarov, who came up with the idea in early 90s. The filmmaker didn't want a record of Kazakh intelligentsia to completely disappear after long years of the Soviet regime. Soviet history taught that Alash Orda was a bourgeois nationalistic movement. Textbooks in schools, lectures in universities and articles in encyclopedias all supported this point of view. Alash Orda members were treated like royalists out of Tsarist Russia. The reaction to the film is mixed. For the first time, it showed archived documents and photos. Scriptwriter Bolat Mursalim says the research lasted for more than half a year. He adds that it is hard to compare the free nature, plans and intentions of Alash Orda members with the current government. The Alash elite in general were more pro-European, unlike the current one, which I believe is pro-Soviet and proletarian. In this sense, Alash Orda was more democratic, educated and people-loving, whereas now we have the rule of bureaucratic dictatorship. We are ruled by the corruption and the dictatorship of officials. The writer's opinion is echoed by public activists and historians. Director Bolat Atabayev notes that the independence of modern Kazakhstan, coupled with the current ruling elite, elite didn't produce a separate, self-sufficient nation. With all of the resources and territorial advantages, the minimum subsistence level is still around $88. We depend on America, Europe, China, Russia and President Nazarbayev. This is Nazarbayev's day of independence from the people. Currently, the history of the first government of the independent Kazakh Republic is virtually forgotten. The present independence mostly resembles a slightly different version of a Soviet state, which still eliminates dissidents looking for changes.
Kazakhstan members in Astana celebrate the historic day together. On Friday, they gathered in the main mosque of the capital to read the traditional prayer and commemorate the victims of 1986 riots.
For Kazakhstan activists from Astana, the mosque is perhaps the only place where they can gather and recall the past. There's no monument in Astana dedicated specifically to the riots of the Kazakh youth. Kazakhstan veterans already asked the MPs and city authorities for a memorial, but were never replied. Until recently, they used to lay flowers at the monument for the victims of political repressions. This year, offended by the authorities, activists decided against following the tradition. We have no other choice but to come to the mosque to pay tribute to the participants of those events. We wish that the city administration and the government paid more attention to us.
Friday, December 17, was also an important day for the Muslims of the country, as the spiritual administration re-elected the chief mufti Absatar Dirbisali for his third term in 10 years. Many of the faithful didn't even know about the news, since the voting was held behind the closed doors, which led to much criticism by the population and religious experts.
The fifth Congress, just like the elections of the Chief Mufti of Kazakhstan, is not a media event. The access to the President's Culture Center, which hosted the forum, was restricted, and uninvited journalists were not welcome. The country's supreme clergy intentionally didn't publicize this import for Kazakhstan event. That is why most Kazakh citizens, with almost 11 million of them Muslim, didn't know anything about the news. This, however, didn't affect the decision-making process. The voting was secret, with candidates represented by delegates and mosque imams. Yet all the praise was again addressed to the current chief mufti, who was re-elected once again. Imams from all regions representing interests of 11 million Muslim Kazakhs voted for the Mufti Absatar Dirbisali. The Congress was attended by ministers, MPs, scientists, and the vote was unanimous. Absatar Dirbisali is a prominent Orientologist. His degrees in higher education was out of competition for the rest of the candidates. The choice is undeniable. The election of a chief mufti inevitably reminds of a presidential race. The result is fairly evident. Even before the Congress, the press service of the religious administration said they didn't know who the other candidates were. Many observers believe the elections were only formal, as the name of the victor was known beforehand. There's an atmosphere of mystery, since there was a talk of a very important issue, like the election of a mufti. This explains the secrecy. Unfortunately, this makes many Muslims note with irony that this no longer looks like a congress, but a meeting of crime bosses. The Muslims Congress is held once every 5 years. It is attended by delegations of Muslim communities from Russia, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan and Mongolia. They have yet to present their assessment on the progress and outcome of the elections. After the forum, Congress participants went to the main mosque of the country for a Friday prayer read by Absatar Dirbisali.
These were all the major news for the week. Join us on Tuesday for more. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend. Goodbye.